So for Sicilian Najdorf, tape 2, side 1. So if we return to the position in diagram 12, which will take a look at white's main alternative to 10 bishop d3, that is 10 pawn to g4. This move was first popularised in the two Gligorich-Fischer games in the 1959 candidates. White delays the development of his king's bishop as he doesn't know its best square yet, and he also prepares to pawn storm the black king side. After 10 g4, black must take immediate action, and his only decent reply is 10 pawn to b5. White will now usually play 11 bishop takes f6, clearing the bishop out of the way so that the pawns can roll on. However, white has also played other moves in this position, so if he plays the knight back on f6 and the bishop on g5, we should examine 11 bishop to g2. Black now plays bishop to b7 and white 12 rook h e1. But after 12 pawn to b4, black has a good game. White will achieve very little compensation if he sacrifices the knight with 13 knight to d5. But after the knight retreats to e2, black's attack on the queen side is already well underway, whereas white hasn't even started operations on the king side. So if you now go back to the position in diagram 12 and add the moves g4 and b5, we shall look at the game Hartston-Portish, Bath 1973, where white played 11 pawn to a3. This is a rather passive move and is hardly the way for white to strike for the advantage. Play continued 11 rook to b8 and 12 bishop to h4. If possible, white would like to retain his dark squared bishop. Black played 12 knight to c5 and white now played 13 bishop takes f6. This looks like a loss of time, but now that black cannot recapture with a knight, white is willing to take on f6. If black wants to be on the safe side now, he should capture on f6 with a pawn, when a position with equal chances for both sides arises. However, Portish decided to play 13 bishop takes f6, allowing white to play 14 bishop takes b5 check. If black now captures this bishop with a takes b5, white plays 15 knight d takes b5, queen to c6, 16 rook takes d6, queen b7, and now 17 rook takes e6 check, followed by knight to d6 check, with a very good position. So if you reset the position after bishop takes b5 check, with the white bishop on b5, knight on d4, rook on d1, and black pawns on a6, e6 and d6, and the queen on c7. Instead of taking the bishop, black played the stronger 14 king to f8, and the game continued 15 bishop to c4, queen to b6. Now b4 was probably the best move and white might claim some advantage. However, Hartston played 16 knight to b3, black played bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and black stands okay. The rest of this game is given in the notes. So if you now go back to diagram 12 again and add the moves g4 and b5, we shall look at the main line where white plays 11 bishop takes f6 and black recaptures with the knight on f6. White now plays 12 pawn to g5 and the knight returns to d7. That's 12 knight to d7. We now come to a critical stage where white must decide whether he should just plough on the king's side or if he should take some precautionary measures on the queen's side. His first choice is to play 13 f5, sacrificing a pawn with check to open up lines, and secondly he has 13 a3, attempting to restrain black on the queen side. First we shall look at 13 f5. Black's first decision now is whether he shall accept the pawn or not. I think black does best to leave white's pawns alone, as after 13 bishop takes g5 check, 14 king to b1, knight to e5, 15 queen to h5, white has a strong attack. In the notes we give the game SICILIAN Najdorf from the Pan American Team Championship 1971. So if you now return to diagram 14, adding 13 f5 for white. Instead of taking the pawn, black's best move seems to be 13 knight to c5. Again, white now has two main choices. The game Plovdiv Asmarapashvili, USSR 1980, continued 14 h4, b4, knight c, 15 knight ce2, pawn to e5, 16 knight to b3, bishop to b7, 17 knight to g3, rook to c8, threatening knight takes e4. White now played 18 rook h2, and the game went 18 d5 for black, 19 knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, 20 e takes d5, castles, 21 bishop to d3, queen to a5, 22 king to b1, now the amazing move 22 bishop to g1. The point of this move is that after white takes the bishop, black plays bishop takes d5 with a double attack on the queen and the rather important pawn on a2. Black went on to win the game. So if you now go back to diagram 14 and add the moves f5 and knight c5, we shall now examine white's main move in this position, 14 pawn to f6. Black now plays g takes f6, white plays g takes f6, and black bishop to f8. Again we reach a position where white has tried a large number of moves. Firstly, we shall look at 16 bishop to h3, and black's best reply now is 16 b4, which virtually forces white into a dubious knight sacrifice, because if he plays 17 knight ce2, black achieves a very good game after 17 bishop to b7, 18 knight to g3, and d5. So if you place the pawn back on d6, bishop on c8, and knight on c3, white can play 17 knight to d5. Black takes the knight and white recaptures on d5, 18 e takes d5. Play continues 18 bishop takes h3, 19 rook h e1 check, king to d8, 20 knight c6 check, king to c8, 21 queen takes h3, king to b7, and it is doubtful that white has enough compensation for the piece. So if we now return to position diagram 15, we shall look at another possibility for white, the quieter move 16 pawn to a3. Black should now play 16 bishop to d7, preparing to castle as quickly as possible. This line doesn't cause black any real problems. The game Ribley-Bukic, the Berschen 1970, continued 17 queen to h5, black castle queenside, 18 queen takes f7, bishop to h6 check, 19 king to b1, rook h f8, 20 queen to h5, and rook takes f6 with about equal chances. So, if we return to diagram 15 again, we shall look at another try for white, 16 knight to f5. Black takes this knight and white plays 17, knight to d5. And now black moves his queen to b7. And then white plays 18, e takes f5. This is a very typical Najdorf sacrifice. White gives up a piece for a long-term pressure due to black's discoordinated pieces and the precarious position of the black monarch. In the only example in this line, white won in the game Klosterman-Popescu 1973, which is given in the notes, with suggestions of possible improvements for black. So if you now go back to diagram 15 again, we shall look at another possibility for white, 16, queen to h5. In the game Mecking-Brown, San Antonio 1972, black continued with 16, bishop to d7. He would have liked to have played 16, b4, but it is usually a good idea to be ready to castle after the reply knight to d5. White's attack can often be very powerful after a knight d5 or knight f5 sacrifice, with the black king stranded in the centre. So after the game continuation 16, bishop to d7, play went 17, bishop to h3, b4, 18, knight ce2, black now castled, queenside, 19, queen takes f7, bishop to h6 check, king to b1, black played rook d f8, 21, queen h5, and now rook takes f6. Black has won his pawn back and he now stands slightly better. The rest of the game is given in the notes. So if you now return to diagram 14 again, we shall look at white's main alternative to f5, that is 13, pawn to a3. This move secures the position of the white knight on c3, and he will now aim for a potential base on d5. After 13, a3, black's best move is 13, rook to b8, aiming for an immediate b4. White now has two main possibilities, bishop h3 and h4. Firstly, we shall look at two games where white played 14, bishop to h3. The first is Planic-Bukic, Novi Travnik 1969, where play continued after bishop to h3, 14, knight c5, 15, rook he1, and now black castled. White was threatening to sacrifice on either f5 or d5, so black removed his king from the centre. White now played 16, queen g3, and the game continued b4, 17, a takes b4, rook takes b4, 18, pawn to f5, queen to b6, 19, f6, bishop to d8, 20, f takes g7, and rook to e8. It is now very difficult to see a way for white to break through, and in a moment it will be black's turn to attack. This explains white's next move, 21, knight to f5, e takes f5, 22, knight d5, queen to a5, 23, knight takes b4, and now a very strong move from black, f4, ensuring that all the central files are kept blocked. White played queen to f3, black played 24, queen a1 check, king to d2, and now queen takes b2, and black has a clear advantage. A little bit of analysis by yourself should convince you of this. So, if you now return to the position in diagram 16, we shall now take a look at another game where white played differently. So after 14, bishop to h3, knight to c5, this time white played 15, rook hg1. The game continued b4, 16, a takes b4, rook takes b4, 17, pawn to f5, queen to b7, 18 f takes e6, f takes e6, 19 pawn to b3, rook to f8, 20 queen to e3, and after g6 an unclear position was reached in the game Matulovic-Bogdanovic, Sarajevo 1966. Against 14 bishop to h3, black seems to be holding his own quite comfortably, but all the positions are extremely difficult to judge. Often play is based on one tempo and both sides go for all-out attacks, but on the other hand, very complex strategical play can arise from these variations. So if you now go back to diagram 16, we shall take a look at white's alternative to bishop h3, which is 14 pawn to h4. This move defends the g-pawn and gains space on the king side, as well as preparing an assault on black's e6 square. Play now continues 14 b4, 15 a takes b4, rook takes b4, and 16 bishop to h3. This is an extremely critical position where black has tried many different moves. I'm recommending just one to you, 16 queen to c5. Black centralises his queen and attacks the white knight. When this moves, he will no longer have to worry about the dangerous sacrifices on his e6 square. The game Belin-Portish, T-side 1972, continued 17 knight to b3, queen to b6, 18 pawn to h5, knight to c5, 19 knight takes c5, and now d takes c5. This is much stronger than taking with a queen, which relinquishes the pressure on the b file. The game now went 20 g6, f takes g6, 21 h takes g6, black played pawn to h6, and 22 knight d5, e takes d5, 23 bishop takes c8, and black castled. He now stands much better because his king is so much more secure than white's. The rest of the game is given in the notes. The system with 10g4 leads to a highly complicated struggle with chances for both sides. Black must always be aware of sacrifices on either his e6, f5, d5 or b5 squares. It would be absolutely impossible to try and analyse all these sacrifices that white can try in this line, and a player must use his own judgment most of the time in deciding what sacrifices to allow, as they very seldom have a clear outcome. So if you now go back to the position in diagram 12, we shall take a look at another try for white, 10 queen to g3. White prepares to play a very rapid e5. The main drawback of 10 queen to g3 is that it allows black to transpose into a favourable variation of the brown system. Black should now play 10 pawn to h6. It is not a very good idea for white now to play 11 bishop takes f6, as sacrifices on b5 are not sound. The game Basko-Hardeske, Hungary 1976, continued 11 bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, 12 knight d b5, a takes b5, 13 knight takes b5, queen to c5, 14 knight takes d6 check, king to e7, 15 queen to b3, and after bishop to d4, black stood very well. So, if you go back to diagram 12 again, and add the moves queen to g3 and pawn to h6, it is most common for white to play 11 bishop to h4, when black continues with his plan 11 g5, and after 12 f takes g5, he attacks the white queen with 12 knight to h5. White now tries to retain his pawn with 13 queen to e3, and black simply increases the pressure with queen to c5. Black is now completely equalised. If white now plays 14 bishop to e2, then black can actually get the better of things with knight to f4, queen takes f4, h takes g5, 16 queen to f2, and rook takes h4. So if you place the white bishop back on f1, queen on e3, pawn on g5, and bishop on h4, and the black rook on h8, pawn on h6, and knight on h5, the game Chubadanitz-Gavrikov, USSR 1980, continued 14 king to b1, h takes g5, 15 bishop to f2, knight to e5, 16 queen to d2, queen to c7, 17 knight to f3, rook to g8, and the game was level. So if you now go back to the position in diagram 12 again, we should take a look at one last try for white, 10 bishop to e2. Now if black plays h6 and g5, as we have already seen, he will end up in a bad version of the Brown system. So he should continue instead in typical Najdorf fashion, 10 pawn to b5. If white now plays quietly, black is going to seize the initiative, so you must play for an early e5. If he plays this immediately, though, black plays 11 bishop to b7, 12 queen to g3, d takes e5, 13 f takes e5, queen takes e5, 14 bishop to f4, queen to c5, 15 bishop to e3, and now if black plays 15 queen to c8, he's just a pawn up, or if he's feeling in a peaceful mood, he can play queen to e5 when white must repeat moves. So if you now return to diagram 12 again and add the moves bishop e2 and b5, instead of pawn to e5, white plays 11 bishop takes f6 first. Black now takes with a knight, as taking with a bishop leaves the d pawn unprotected and allows the familiar sacrifice knight d takes b5. So after 11 knight takes f6, 12 pawn to e5, black plays bishop to b7. In the game Larsen-Portish, Manila 1974, white now continued 13 queen to g3, but after 13 d takes e5, 14 f takes e5, knight to d7, 15 bishop to f3, bishop takes f3, 16 g takes f3, pawn to g6, 17 f4, queen to b7, 18 h4. Now black castled queenside and had the better game. So if you go back to diagram 12 again and add the moves bishop to e2, b5, bishop takes f6, knight takes f6, e5 and bishop to b7, instead of queen g3, people began to play the extremely interesting queen sacrifice with 13 e takes f6. Black naturally takes the queen, 13 bishop takes f3, and white recaptures on f3, and is 14 bishop takes f3, and black plays bishop takes f6. You can now see the reason why white had to take on f6 before playing e5. As in this position, black would have been able to play g takes f6, attacking the white bishop on g5. So back to the game. After 14, bishop takes f6. White plays 15, bishop takes a8. And black cuts off the bishop's retreat with d5. White now plays 16, bishop takes d5. He must try and create play before black can castle. If black now plays 16, queen takes f4 check, he loses after 17, king to b1, e takes d5, not bishop takes d4 when he loses a piece after bishop c6 and knight e2, forking the queen and bishop. So after e takes d5, white plays 18, knight takes d5, queen g5, 19, rook h e1 check, king to f8, 20, knight to f3, queen takes g2, 21, knight takes f6, g takes f6, 22, rook d8 check, king to g7, and 23, rook to d3. White's threat of rook g1 is terminal. So if you now return to the position in diagram 17, you will see that black runs into trouble for similar reasons if he plays e takes d5, which leaves us with just one move, 16, bishop takes d4. White now recaptures 17, rook takes d4, and black plays e takes d5. And after 18, rook e1 check, king to f8, the position is equal. Black has enough time to consolidate with g6 and king to g7. There are a couple of games in the notes from this position. 10, bishop to e2 is not the sort of line to terrify anyone, but it does seem to be adequate for a draw. I have now concluded my analysis of opening theory on the Najdorf, and will now examine a couple of games. The first where black didn't play too well and was blown off the board, and the second where it was white who ran into trouble. The first game that we shall look at is Fischer-Bednarski, Havana 1966. If you return to the position on diagram 1, play continued with Fischer's favourite 6, bishop to c4, e6, 7, bishop to b3, and now knight bd7. Bednarski plays a little known variation with the idea of stopping off white's dangerous bishop as soon as possible. Fischer decides not to hang around and tries to take advantage of black's rather slow development of the king side and plays 8, pawn to f4. Bednarski now continues with his plan, 8, knight to c5, and Fischer plays 9, f5. If black now plays 9, e5, then white plays 10, knight de2, and black can't take the e-pawn because after knight c takes e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, 12, queen to d5 wins. So if you reset the position with the white queen on d1, knights on c3 and d4, and pawn on e4, black pawned on e6 and knights on f6 and c5, Bednarski instead actually played the incredibly risky 9, knight f takes e4. And white now played 10, f takes e6. Black's best move now would be to recapture on e6 with a pawn, although after white castles he will have excellent attacking chances at the price of a mere pawn. However, instead, Bednarski played a 10, queen h4 check, and Fischer played 11, pawn to g3. Black is already committed to his next move, 11, knight takes g3. Obviously, white cannot take this knight, so he played 12, knight to f3. And black retreated his queen to h5, so as to keep the pin on white's h-pawn. After 12, queen h5, white played 13, e takes f7 check, and black moved his king to d8. and white now moved its attacked rook to g1, that is 14 rook g1. Black is already in very serious trouble. His risky opening play has completely backfired. His king is stuck in the centre, and white has even got his pawn back. Black now played 14 knight to f5, and white played the very strong 15 knight to d5, trying to bring about bishop g5 check in the most favourable circumstances. Black now decided to remove the troublesome f-pawn with 15 queen takes f7, and white played 16 bishop to g5 check. Now if black interposes a piece on e7, white will take it with a knight and then play queen takes d6 check. So instead, black played 16 king to e8. Now white could have won black's queen with knight to f6 check, but he decided to play the even stronger 17 queen e2 check. And black's reply 17 bishop to e6 is forced, and white now played 18 knight to f4, and again black's reply king to d7 is forced. White now played 19 castles queenside, threatening to win black's queen with knight to e5 check. So black moved his queen to e8, 19 queen to e8, and white now won by 20 bishop takes e6 check, knight takes e6, 21 queen e4, g6, 22 knight takes e6, and black resigned. If black takes back on e6, white wins at least a rook with queen takes b7 check. An excellent game from Fischer, who severely punished black's loose opening play. This is the end of side 1. Please turn over to side 2. The second game we shall look at is the game Plaskett-Gallagher, London 1982. If we return to the position in diagram 1 and play the moves 6 bishop to g5, e6, 7 f4, and now 7 pawn to b5, this is the Pologoyevsky variation. If white now plays normally with a move such as queen to f3, and black can develop his queen side much quicker than in other Najdorf variations, and he will often seize the initiative. So the only real try to bust the poly is to play 8 pawn to e5, which Plaskett played in the game. The game continued d takes e5, 9 f takes e5, queen to c7. And white now played 10 e takes f6. His main alternative is to play queen to e2 when he keeps his dangerous back squared bishop. However, after 10 e takes f6, the tactical point behind black's play is revealed as he wins his piece back with 10 queen to e5 check, 11 bishop to e2, and now queen takes g5. Now white castles, and black moves his queen again with 12 queen to e5. It is more important for black to centralise his queen than to start moving his minor pieces. One of the secrets of the Pologoyevsky variation is that often the minor pieces are developed from their original squares. White now played 13 knight to f3, and black played queen to e3 check. And after 14 king to h1, simply removes black's pawn on f6, 14 g takes f6. Now white must decide whether he is going to go all out to refute black's unbelievable opening play. 15 knight to d5 is his most dangerous try. Black must take this knight, and now white can play 16 bishop takes b5 check, a takes b5, 17 rook e1, queen takes e1 check, queen takes e1, to e7. In my opinion, this position is slightly in black's favour, the main point being the possibility of blockading the e-file with a knight on e5 or a bishop on e6. Black is not really worried about losing pawns, as this will just open up lines, especially for his bishops. So if we now return to the position in diagram 18, Plaskett decided to play 15 queen to e1, with the very subtle threat of bishop takes b5 check, winning the queen. Black now played 15 knight to d7. It is still possible for white to play bishop takes b5, but after queen takes e1, bishop takes d7 check, bishop takes d7, rook a takes d1, the position is in black's favour with his two bishops and strong central passed pawn. So if you now go back to diagram 18 and add the moves queen e1 and knight d7, white played 16 rook to d1, and black now retreated his queen to her best square, 16 queen to b6. The game continued 17 knight to d4, rook to g8, 18 bishop to h5, bishop to b7. Black prevents white's threats to e6 by a counter threat on g2. White now played 19 knight to e4, and black simply played 19 castles queenside. Black now stands a lot better. He has two extremely powerful bishops, as well as the open g-file, and is ready to start kicking the white knights away. White now played 20 bishop takes f7, and black played the very strong move rook to g4. White cannot move his attack knight on e4, as he will then lose his other knight on d4, so he first played 21 queen c3 check, and black played king to b8. White now moved his knight to its only square, 22 knight to g3, and black continued its aggressive play with 22 knight to e5, discovering an attack on the knight on d4, as well as hitting the bishop on f7. White again has only one move, 23 knight takes e6, and now black moved in for the kill. 23 rook takes d1, 24 rook takes d1, queen to f2, 25 queen c7 check, king to a7. Black's king is perfectly safe, and it is white who is threatened with mate. So after the forced 26 rook g1, black played knight to f3. Obviously white can't take this, so he played 27 rook to f1, and now there was a beautiful finish with 27 rook to h4. White now resigns as mate is forced. After 28 h3, black just takes it off, 28 rook takes h3 check.
On our tapes we usually have an obligatory musical interlude. As the Najdorf is really the heavy metal opening of the chessboard, who better than Twisted Sister to do us a tune before we call Joe back for an encore? Okay. Twisted Sister, yeah!
It was 3 in the morning when she took me apart. She read the furniture, she read my heart. She danced on my head like Alfred Murray. The scars ain't never gonna mend in a hurry. If I ever I could answer for shadow, glasses are dark, no my dear stand and I, oh, Lord. Cry, cry, to make you feel better. Get it all down in was glad to sit down, my body couldn't touch. Short to monkey, I was a real non-busy. I went for the phone, but the line was busy. Just when I thought the things would get better, when you go off, come on, see a thing that I, cry, cry, if it makes you feel better, set it all down in a kiss, thing that I, cry, cry, if it makes you feel better, set it all down in a kiss, thing that I, well, I like coffee and I like tea. What I just don't like is the feeling. It makes me nervous and gives me the hives. Waiting for a kiss from my thoughts to fire. Just when I think I can laugh and forget it, right to the door come a tear stain letter. Cry, cry, if it makes you feel better, set it all down and kiss stain letter. Cry, cry, if it makes you feel better, set it all down in a kiss stain letter. Cry, cry, if it makes you feel better, set it all down in a kiss stain letter.
Well, unfortunately, we couldn't get Twisted Sister, so we had to make do with Richard Thompson. And now here is Joe Gallagher back with us to go through his history-making game against Nigel Short. This was the one which put Nigel on the map. No, Joe on the map. Nigel off the map. Over to you, Nigel. I mean, Joe.
Well, as you've just heard, I've been dragged back to analyse another game for Mike, but first I'd just like to point out that I'm no way responsible for his taste in music. Anyway, the game Short Gallagher, Oakham 84, started E4, C5, knight to F3, D6, D4, C takes D4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, a6. And now play went 6 f4, queen to c7, 7 a4, g6. If now white has decided to play for e5 with a move like 8 knight to f3, then black would achieve a comfortable game by playing bishop to g4. The game Kramlin-Ostermeyer, Reykjavik, 1984, continued 8 knight to f3, bishop to g4, 9 bishop to d3, bishop to g7, 10 castles, castles, 11 pawn to h3, bishop takes f3, 12 queen takes f3, and now e6, and black had an equal game. If you now return to diagram 1 and add 6 f4, queen c7, 7 a4, g6, short played 8 bishop to e2, and black bishop to g7, 9 bishop to e3, castles, 10 castles, knight to c6, 11 knight to b3, and now knight to a5. Black must play this move to prevent white from playing pawn to a5, and black will be in a sorry state. White now decided to try and completely refute black's play so far, and played 12 e5. Black took this, d takes e5, and then 13 f takes e5, and now rook to d8. Black cannot capture the pawn on e5 because after bishop to f4 he loses a piece. So after rook to d8, white is now committed to sacrificing his queen. As if he plays queen to e1, and black wins with knight takes b3, e takes f6, knight takes a1, f takes g7, and now the knight escapes as well as forking queen and bishop with 16 knight takes c2. If you now place the white pawn back on e5, queen on d1, knight on b3, rook on a1, and his other pawn on c2, the black bishop on g7, and the knights on f6 and a5. White now played 14 e takes f6, and black took the queen, rook takes d1, 15 rook a takes d1, bishop takes f6. White now continued 16 knight to d5, and black queen takes c2. The performance of the black queen in this game must be one of the greatest by a single piece of all time, and it certainly deserves an Oscar. Short's original intention in this position had been to play 17 knight takes a5, queen takes e2, 18 rook to d2, and now queen to h5. The queen must come here so that in some variations it can swing across and take the white knight on a5. And now 19 rook takes f6, which is met by the stunning bishop to e6. Black is in no hurry to capture the white pieces that are on prise, and after this calm move, white is in a lot of trouble. His best now is 20 knight takes e7 check, king to f8, 21 knight takes b7, king takes e7, and 22 rook f1, when black has excellent winning chances. So, if you now go back to diagram A, white played instead 17 knight takes f6 check, e takes f6, 18 rook d8 check, king g7, and now white played bishop to c5, threatening mate in 2, and black calmly defended with 19 pawn to h5. If white now plays 20 bishop to d4, black wins in the incredible variation 20 bishop to f5. And now if rook takes a8, knight takes b3 wins very easily. So white must play 21 bishop to d1, queen to c4, 22 knight takes a5, queen takes f1 check, 23 king takes f1, rook takes d8, 24 knight to b3, and now bishop to e6 when black wins a piece and the game. So, if you now return to position diagram B, another try for white is to play 20 bishop to f8 check, black plays king h7, and now white plays 21 bishop e7, threatening to take on f6 and deliver mate. So black plays 21 knight to c6. Now white plays knight to d4, but black can take this. Knight takes d4, 23 bishop takes f6, knight takes e2 check, 24 king h1, bishop to h3, 25 rook takes a8, and now black plays knight g3 and mates. So, if you go back to the position in diagram B again, white actually played 20 bishop to d1, and black replied 20 queen to c4, and now white played 21 rook d4. It is now possible for black to play queen takes b3, 22 bishop takes b3, and knight takes b3. And after rook d5 you can play bishop e6, or after rook c4 knight to d2. But after a move like 23 bishop e7, white should be able to hold on for the draw. So, if you now go back to diagram C, instead of 21 queen takes b3, black played the calm 21 queen to e6. And white played 22 knight takes a5, and black replied with b6, forking the minor pieces. Black now has a winning position. If white had played here 23 rook d6, then after 23 queen e5, black wins the house. So if you place the rook back on d4 and the queen on e6, white tried 24 bishop to f3, and the game finished b takes c5, 25 rook to e4, queen to d7, 26 rook to d1, queen to c7, 27 rook to e2, bishop to g4, 28 bishop takes g4, queen takes a5, 29 bishop to d7, rook to d8, 30 rook ed2, queen to b4, 31 pawn to h3, pawn to g5, 32 king to h1, pawn to g4, and now white blunders completely with 33 rook f2, and after rook takes d7 resigned, because if rook takes rook, queen to e1 check wins the other rook on f2.
I think we should end this tape with a summary of the major lines that Joe has explained to us. If you recall the start position of diagram 1, Joe mentioned that he'd made at least 9 moves for white. These included the 3 fringe moves, 6a4, 6g3 and 6h3, and they were followed by the Fischer line, 6 bishop c4, and the less popular bishop e3. After that we looked at 6f4, then Karpov's favourite bishop e2, and finally we arrived at the main line, which was 6 bishop g5. Now that makes actually 8 moves. The ninth one was bishop d3, which I don't think Joe bothered to look at. Now the first 3 moves were dealt with quickly on the tape, 6a4, and black doesn't have to answer that with an immediate e5, but can play the waiting move queen c7. Then if white plays bishop e2 on move 7, black can transpose into the 6 bishop e2 line with the move e5, because white will then no longer be able to play bishop c4 to control the d5 square. If on move 6 white plays h3, Joe is also wary of playing an immediate e5, because then white would bring his knight back to e2, play g4 and his knight round to g3. Instead, he suggests that black should play knight c6, and if white then goes g4, then to play e6. This transposes into the Scheveningen, with black having an extra tempo because white usually plays g4 without prefacing it with h3 in the Scheveningen. Now this is a theoretical advantage for black, and I expect, however, that you won't be too pleased that you have to learn another opening. But then there's always Jim Plaskett's tape on the Scheveningen. Anyway, maybe you won't meet h3 that often. Now there's a more serious threat posed in move 6 g3, and to that then black does play an immediate e5 and then bishop e7. White's later plan is to play g4, a castle of course, and bring his knight from e2 round to g3. This was shown in the game between Kinmark and Cavalli, and black responded on the queen side with b5 and b4, and he'd fianchettoed his bishop at b7. Later on, white had the choice of recapturing a bishop on e3. I feel that white should have taken with the f-pawn instead of taking with the knight, and then he'd have retained equal chances. Anyway, see what you think. Now, we go on to the Fischer line, which is 6 bishop c4, and Joe gave here 6 e6, white bishop b3, then black b5, white castled. He also looked at f4, but he thinks castling is better. Black goes bishop e7, and white goes f4. And then there's a critical choice for black. Shall he play castles, or shall he play bishop b7? Now if he's castles on the king's side, white gets a rapid attack with e5, followed by moving his queen to h5. He can also bring his bishop to e3, if you'll remember those lines. Black's resources seem okay in that line, but he can also play, instead of castling kingside, he can play bishop b7. And this gives him the option of going with his king on the other wing, which idea was shown in Costin's variation. That, I believe, goes white 10 e5, black d takes e5, white f takes e5, then black bishop c5, followed by bishop captures on d4 and knight c6, and then castling queenside. Now the next line we looked at was the bishop e3 line, and that seems to involve a totally different plan for white. It's rather like a Yugoslav attack against the dragon. White goes, say, queen d2 and tries to castle queenside, and then he plays f3, which of course stops black playing knight g4, hitting his bishop, but he also intends to play g4. And the g4 move isn't just to open lines on the king's side. Anyway, it's not that easy to open them because black hasn't got a pawn at g6. But white's planning to play g5, and that will drive the f6 knight away, and then white will have better control of b5. Now, the Banas-Dana game was a spectacular example of how black could defend against this system. In fact, black played a5, then a4, and then he brought his rook up to a5, which supported his advanced d5. Joe gives an alternative to this game in playing knight bd7 instead of this Banos-Dana move. Next we looked at the 6f4 line, and that has the idea of meeting black's e5 with the retreat of the knight from d4 to f3, and this doesn't block the f pawn. Joe Gallagher mentions the critical game None against Ribley, where black brought his knight round to c5. White had actually played his bishop to d3, as was suggested, played his bishop to d3, but then Ribley brought his knight round to c5, exchanged it for the white bishop on d3, and this seemed to nullify the white attack. In other games which we saw, for example, Cramlin against Gallagher, white got quite a strong attack by playing f4 and f5. Besides playing e5 on move 6, black can also play, as we've just seen in short Gallagher, the move queen c7. And if white then plays f4, black can even try a king's fianchetto, a sort of dragon, which works very well. Next we looked at the bishop e2 line, and this leads us into typical Najdorf formations, with black playing e5 and white bringing his knight back to b3. No attacks materialize in these games, just an attempt by white to restrict black's game with moves like a4 to a5. Critical lines see black playing his bishop to e6, not to b7, and white moving his pawns to f4 and to a4. Later on, the struggle to control d5 becomes intense, and the game Balashov-Ubilava and even Karpov-Fortish showed how white played this very subtle rook move, rook f1 to c1, which was to guard the c pawn and later allow the knight from c3 to go to d5. Now at some point Fortish played his rook to d8. Instead, according to Joe, he should have played his rook from f8 to e8, and this slight difference would have made quite a lot of difference in the outcome of the game. Now the most involved lines of the Najdorf arrive after white's sixth move, which is bishop g5, and this attacks the knight at f6, and therefore black isn't going to be able to play e5 so easily without losing d5 control. Joe bypassed the complexities of the poison pawn and the Polygaevsky variation, and instead concentrated on playing the defense e6 followed by bishop e7. The critical positions arise on the 10th move, where if white plays the popular 10 bishop d3, Joe suggests the brown line with pawn h6 and then pawn to g5. However, besides the bishop d3 move, you'll also have to face probably pawn g4, which used to be the most popular line. Gligorich played it a few times against Fischer. The idea is for white to play bishop takes f6 and then pawn to g5, followed by a general kingside pawn storm. So a lot of detailed work to be done on that. Now, if you intend to play the Najdorf variation yourself, then try to get a bird's eye view like this, and try also to imagine what you think will happen when the opponents choose various lines against you, and make, say, a summary by yourself of the variations. Prepare to put some work into it before you actually play the game, so you won't be surprised or maybe uncertain that you can't remember certain obscure variations. Try and play the games before you actually play them.